Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris. Really exciting episode today for you if you're anything like me and you're really interested in slips, trips and falls, because I've got Mark Brady on the show, and Mark's going to introduce a revolutionary new technology, fantastic bit of kit, which is a way of identifying spillages on floors using CCTV technology, and therefore alerting people to dry up the floor and clear up the spillage to try to prevent accidents from happening. So really, really interesting. Lots of use cases for this. New to the market, but making some great strides with trials and some data, which we'll get into, and a very exciting product which I was keen to share with everybody. To me, as I think I say to Mark, this fits perfectly alongside the kind of work that my business and I do as well. You know, we focus in on the areas of buildings that are going to be wet, irrespective of what you do. Toilets, entrances, pool sides, kitchens, etc. But the vast majority of floors, 95+%, are not wet floors. You don't need to have an anti-slip floor. You don't need to worry about the slip resistance of the floor surface necessarily, because if you can keep those floors clean and dry, then you're not going to have slips. And this technology, Spill Detect, I think will be really helpful in that regard. Bit of a strange one in terms of the structure, because we pick up actually just halfway through a conversation we were having, because we were talking about something that was relevant and interesting. So I just freestyled and went straight into it. So you won't hear the usual welcome to the show, Mark, or anything like that, but we do get to that bit a little bit in. So with that, I hope you enjoy this episode. Check out the tech, really interesting. I think it's going to be a bit of a game changer. And if you enjoy it, please hit subscribe. Please give us likes and comments on social media and shares, because that's really helpful in getting the word out about the podcast. And see you on the other side of the introductory music in my conversation with Mark Brady. Cheers. And on lots of floors, you can't even see spillages. And that's why these accidents happen. Because if you could, there's a good example of a story from a train station, and it's a guy who's ex-HSE,
right.
An industry friend of mine, and he was sitting there having a coffee on the mezzanine, because you're in Manchester, aren't you? It is in Manchester Station, where you've got the mezzanine up there. And he saw somebody spill some orange juice on the floor.
Right.
And straight, within 60 seconds or 2 minutes, there was a call out on the tannoy, cleaner to XYZ, there's been a spillage. And he's thinking to himself, well, that's pretty good. The cleaner turns up with their cleaning trolley and proceeds to mop up the spill.
I know where this story goes, Christian.
Yeah, exactly. They've mopped up the spill. They've actually, rather than a very small, 30 centimeters squared of orange that you could see on the floor, they've produced a sort of 3 meter squared translucent area of risk. And then they've plonked their yellow sign out, which doesn't, really do anything, and walked away. And it's like, oh God, we've actually made the problem worse. We think we've solved the problem. We think we've been, we've done a lot of good stuff. We've been proactive. Well, proactive. We've reacted quickly, but we've actually made the problem worse. But then, if we'd actually left the orange juice on the floor, probably nobody would have slipped on it, because you can see it.
Well, and you break the stats down on that, and a large percentage, more so than you'd imagine, of slip cases are from the resulting cleaning job, especially when it comes down to liquid. As you say, what you're effectively doing is you're taking a spill, you're making it bigger, and you're making it less visible, with the cleaning fluids that you put on. Exactly that. Yeah.
You know what? That was a good start of a podcast. So let's leave that bit in, and we'll start the interview from here, because that's an interesting.
Let's roll with it.
Yeah, let's roll with it. Yeah. So welcome, Mark, to the podcast. Do you want to just give a quick overview of your background and the business, or businesses, should I say, that you're involved in?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, Christian. Appreciate it. Yeah. So Mark Brady, Pleased to meet the listeners there. I'm Vice President of anything commercial for SeeChange Limited. SeeChange as an organisation, very much technology company. We'll go into, purpose of this podcast, a lot of what we do, but at a top level, it's worth saying we're a software company that's focused largely on making use of data generated from the real world. And to net that down further, primarily cameras. So we ingest information from cameras, complex unstructured video data. We look at what's happening in that, and then we allow action to be taken upon it, depending on what the situation is that's being defined.
Yeah. Very interesting. And you're relatively new to that business, but it's part of a group, is that right?
Yeah, so it's got an interesting history, actually, that's probably worth sharing here. We, as an organisation, were incubated inside of a company called ARM. So those familiar with the tech scene will be familiar with ARM. ARM is an organisation, very successful UK-based technology company that's present in the majority of technology that you use today. So mobile phones, car, infotainment systems, technology from ARM is embedded in those.
Yeah.
ARM as a company recognised what's known as the edge intelligence market unfolding, and that is, can I do more work on smaller devices? And incubated this organisation, SeeChange. And in that, the whole game for SeeChange is, if we can take data and intelligence that's been generated at a point in time, make sense of it in a cost-effective way, and then be able to create an insight for a company to take action on, there's a business right there. That's kind of what it was born out of. When you think about data that's generated in the real world, lots of research got us to this point of accepting, in fact, that a camera as a sensor is largely one of the richest sources of input. So we can take a camera, the world is designed for vision generally, we can take input from it, we can make sense of it, reason about it in real time, and then give some output that you can take action upon. You've got kind of a mix of effectively technology blended with real world that businesses can then create value from. And just to take that a bit further and, go with me, indulge me here, because, it is very much firmly a tech organization. Generally speaking, camera data historically has been streamed, sent over a network somewhere and stored, never looked at, Christian.
Yeah.
So about 5%, depending on which stat you use, of video footage is ever even looked at. You pay to create it, you pay to send it, you pay to store it, and then you pay a person retrospectively to look at it in the event that something's gone wrong. So the whole concept for us is, if we can recognize something happening in that video stream as it happens, there's inherent value sat there. It's almost a latent value that is just unexploited at this point in time. And that's kind of where the story begins. So as a company, we're based in Manchester, north of England. You'll hear from the accent, definitely a northern tone there. We're about 20 people large, focused very much on technology, but our go-to-market, getting out there and getting engaged with customers, is based on partnerships. So we select key partnerships. One of those key partnerships, the strategic partnership we have with a company called Ocucon, we'll explore more in this discussion, because that's really pertinent and important on the slips, trips and falls product that we've launched with them.
Yeah. It's fascinating, because you're hitting on a real hot topic or pet peeve of mine, which is around data versus insight. Because I see a lot of data, and people talk about data being the new oil, and data this and data that. And I think to myself, well, actually, data itself is not that valuable. It's only if you can draw the insight and make use of it and have derive some value from it. So your analogy of, the camera video being stored away and never used, well, that's tons of data, but actually, can you do something to leverage value from that data and insight? Well, that's when it becomes interesting, doesn't it?
For sure. And as an individual, I've been focused largely on the software side of things in my career, but always had an interest in data. Lots of people talk about it. We talk about big data. We talk about analytics. I've worked with some of the biggest banks globally in helping them understand how they save money on storing their data for a start, because these guys are talking petabytes of transactional data. I've worked with national utilities companies that want to better understand the usage patterns of consumers, for example. In those discussions, you're largely talking about a set of data that's been created, and you're retrospectively trying to find the needle in the haystack, because we should be able to, right? Everyone's doing this. I'm looking for this golden nugget, something that's going to pop out and hit me on the head and say, there's a return on the time that you've spent looking into the data. The problem, Christian, is regardless how good you get at doing that, in retrospect, the data by definition is less valuable. Of course, there's still value in it. You find something pertinent to your business that you can take action upon, fine. But if you go further upstream and you look at being able to take insights from the data at the point that it's created, it's a lot of what happens online right now. It's easier there. You know, online shopping, for example, I can work out how long somebody spent with a mouse hovering over an item, or whether or not they left a basket, and gain insight into where they were geographically through some marker of an IP address, whatever it is. In the physical world, that kind of lags. Being able to take action and do something about it in real time is difficult. And I think, you know, as things have unfolded with artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's now leaning in this direction. I mean, let's take it in a crazy direction. Autonomous driving, for example. You have to take action in some level of real time in order for the car to be pointed in the right direction, and you know, no major danger occurs to others on the road. But usually to do that, it's quite costly. And from a technology standpoint, it usually takes a large amount of compute in order to determine what's happening and take decisions on it. SeeChange as an organization, as I said at the top of the call, we're very much focused on how do you do that in a lower footprint? How do you do that with less compute? And then you've got something that's commercially viable. Because if I can take that real-time data, I can look at what's going on with that data at the point in time without it costing me a fortune, then pass an insight to take action upon. There's the magic happening right there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I have to say, having driven a lot in various countries, not just the UK, I'm looking forward to autonomous drivers, because I think it's going to be much safer on the roads when we've got machines driving us around than humans.
And that's it. There are plenty of stats out there that back it. I guess there's the psychological acceptance of. Firstly, am I okay getting in the car, putting my feet up and shutting my eyes? I'm sure there'll be some level of law and regulation around that, of course. But taking it to that extreme, does the human? Do we ever get to a point where we can generally accept that's a good thing? Statistically, yes. You know, there's still kind of that inertia, that barrier to overcome, isn't there? With where are you happy that everyone's, you know, I guess it's the blend as well, isn't it, Christian? You've still got, for some period of time, you know, the manual, then the automatic, the autonomous. That's the fun period, I guess. That'd be the interesting time. And it's I suppose it's like anything though, isn't it? In 100 years, people won't appreciate, you know, won't think, well, what were these people doing driving their own cars, or, you know, because life will have just moved on. But it takes time to get to those points. It does.
So with that as a really valuable context, obviously we met to think about one of the particular usages of that technology around slips, trips and falls, but there are some other broader offerings that you've got as well. Do you want to just give a bit further context in terms of the headline sort of levels where that technology is being used for a kind of risk management, loss prevention approach?
Yeah, good question. As I mentioned, we've got a strategic partnership with a company called Ocucon. We're to some extent a logical extension of each other in how we're addressing these risk management problems. we in SeeChange, software technology company, they in Ocucon, software technology company, slightly different lean. We have grown up through this machine learning, artificial intelligence, edge intelligence kind of world. Ocucon have already got products established, specifically in retail, some really key clients, the likes of KFC, Dunelm, Aldi, with a focus on loss prevention, risk reduction. So the spill offering is part of that portfolio.
Yeah.
The other offerings in that portfolio include an offering called Pixelate. Pixelate is video redaction. So again, back to the video theme, we take video and we redact certain parts of it so that it complies with privacy requirements of sending that video out of premises, for example.
Yeah.
Key thing there, again, it's all about how do we automate as best we can, take the manual side out of the job.
Yeah.
You've got a video stream, you want certain bits of it removing, we can identify, well, actually that's a person, that's a body, so not the individual, when we're not identifying the individual but a body. We can redact parts of that image so that it remains private. There's also a cloud video element to this, which is, as I mentioned before, lots of video created, stored. You've got to be doing that in some cost-effective way.
Yeah.
How do you do that in a cost-effective way, combined with it's got to be private, perhaps when it's gone off-site and you've stored it somewhere. And then there's the Occupy solution, and this is where SeeChange and Ocucon really came together. Occupy was born out of a requirement during COVID. Retailers primarily needing to understand store occupancy to ensure that it's kept to a particular threshold and prevent people entering, leaving stores. You'll see from a number of retail outlets you go to now, Christian, there are certain systems in place. It used to be the person at the front door with the clicker that was quickly replaced by technology. But there's certain systems that prevent you entering the store if the occupancy is above a certain threshold. And it all comes down to that risk management safety thing again. Then in terms of the slips, trips, falls offering itself, we identified Ocucon as a strategic partner based on what they'd already done in this space. And for our technology to really hit the right customers, be most effective in what we're trying to do, which is actually stop people slipping and falling in the first place. Ocucon are a great partner in assisting us doing that. If you think about the whole technology being deployed, risk management, loss prevention, doing that with observing what's going on in a video sequence like we just talked about for SeeChange, and then mapping that to a business outcome, that kind of epitomizes the SeeChange Ocucon relationship.
No, that makes sense. And I was very excited and was keen to have you on, obviously, because I think it's very, very clever, and I think it really addresses a big problem, particularly in the retail spaces where over the last few years, we have seen cutbacks in terms of facilities management budgets and cleaning budgets and things like that, and therefore spillages have become an increasing problem because they're not being dealt with efficiently and effectively. And we've also seen some quite large criminal fines as well as a result of spillages on floors in supermarkets. So I was involved in a case personally where a gentleman sadly died in a co-op store in Truro. He slipped on a leaking chiller and died as a result. And and then Tesco have had a couple of big fines. The most recent one was almost £750,000 for a very similar incident where the leaking chiller and just not really dealing with that spillage in a as effective way as they should have done, I suppose, is what the court would have deemed as the answer. So for me, it's great because it also addresses something that I don't really address either myself, because we focus on, as you know, the 5% of the floor areas in any given building that are going to always get wet, and it's not about spillages, it's about water ingress or or whatever it might be.
For sure.
Because it's not reasonable or practicable or cost effective to be getting us to do what we do across thousands of square meters of shopping mall floor. So yeah, really keen to delve into it. So do you want to just explain then? We've kind of looked at the it's all about footage and the principle of how that works, but in a practical sense, what does the system do? How does it work? What outcomes do we get from it?
What you've just discussed there is almost quite a nice segue into almost how did we get into this, and particularly in retail in the first place. When you think about the technology we have, which essentially uses an existing video camera, streams the footage from it locally more often than not, generates some insight into what's happening in that video footage, and then allows you to take action upon it. You get to a point where retail as an industry is very progressive right now. And when we've done our research and looked at, well, where do you best deploy this kind of technology? Retailers in bricks and mortar stores in particular are looking for, how do we maintain a level of competitiveness against online? And you'll hear this, the rise of online and grocery shopping online is going through the roof. Actually, about 80% and more of grocery shop is still done in store. Yeah. People want to go, they want to touch it, they want to check dates on things. It's almost an experiential thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, of course, COVID comes along. The world changes, and this isn't one of those, point at COVID and string a whole bunch of stuff out from that. But actually, what it meant for retailers is they found themselves in a particular situation where even just managing entry and exit of a store now is a thing. Who'd have thought that only 2 years ago?
Absolutely, yeah. Mm.
Once you're into that realm, and then you're questioning, well, what do I do to assist in that I don't want to have to put more staff on? It's not a good thing to do, particularly in a COVID environment. Yeah. But actually, there are some cutbacks and things anyway. Technology generally starts to creep in there, as we talked about. Accessing the store, exiting the store. Mm. With our technology, being able to look at what's happening in a video stream, it lends itself to retail immediately, because retailers per square foot have actually a large number of cameras.
Yes.
And ironically, that's largely for liability in the first place. Yeah. So now we've got this camera-laden area that we can connect into and start observing things. And the start of the story, some of our other offerings in SeeChange, the start of the story begins with, well, let's look at things like stock on shelves. If we can do on-shelf availability, that's got a great business case that underpins it. Fantastic. If we can look at suspicious behavior in aisles, has somebody in an aisle just taken in rapid succession a number of high-value items? We can observe those things. Mm. Interesting what we found with almost this pause in thinking during COVID and an acceleration of, well, what is it we actually need to focus on? Mm. We've seen this kind of pull, particularly in retail, that says, wow, when we're getting more people back into store, which is happening now, there's a volume of traffic that's occurring. When we're trying to attract and retain that footfall in a store, combined with the whole corporate social responsibility angle that's been right there in the headlights because of COVID, we actually started seeing requests coming for, can we do something with detecting clear liquid on the floor? Yeah. Because that's a really hard thing to detect, even with a human walking up and down aisles, trying to determine, is there a liquid on the floor? Yeah. As we said earlier, things like orange juice, maybe slightly easier. Algorithmically, though, to date, it's never really been a solved problem. No. And then the clear liquid thing begins to creep in with things like hand sanitizer, Christian. So more hand sanitizers deployed. There's a hand sanitizer station on the way in, on the way out, throughout the store. It almost thrust right into the forefront this thought of, how do we deal with being able to detect liquids, combined with this? And I know on some of the other podcasts that you've done and I've listened to, there's always this question over, are organizations really taking it seriously enough in retail, I think there are a number of variables that have come together to start putting it right at the top of the agenda.
Yeah.
And that's where we started to see this pull. And so when we first went to market and we were considering, well, what kind of things are most important to detect for these organizations, we took a whole raft of inputs. But then you start to see this pull from liquid being something that's particularly important to detect.
Yeah.
And we'll get more under the covers on this, I'm sure, in the discussion. There are two sides to that coin. The first is corporate social responsibility. Can I protect customers and employees in a bricks and mortar store? Because that's right up there, important through COVID to attract and retain customer in the first place.
Yeah.
And the flip side to it, when you look at the business case, the payouts, you know, the negative side of not having protected and made safe in the first place, financially is hugely costly. The numbers you talked about, then we can break that down even more. You can end up being quite surprised the more you dig into this at just the actual cost of what starts to happen in paying out for these things.
I once a good friend of mine and customer who works for a large cleaning company told me a story that he stood up at a end of year meeting. He's head of health and safety, and
right.
And one of his colleagues, who was kind of regional director or something, stood up and started kind of waxing lyrical about, we've achieved this and we've achieved that and we've won this and we've won that and we've retained this and blah blah blah, and sort of sat down. And my friend then had to stand up and say, yeah, that's all great, but did you know that we would have made more money this year if none of your staff had gone to work? Because the profit that you've made, bearing in mind cleaning is obviously a low margin business, like retail, the profit that we've made on our activities has been wiped out by all of our accident and claims costs.
It's stunning, isn't it? Stunning. Yeah.
So I mean, particularly for the, you know, if you're in a high volume, low margin business like cleaning, FM, like retail, you know, these costs are huge. You know, somebody like a Tesco or a Sainsbury's or a Morrison's, you know, to make £10,000 of profits, which is what a slip trip claim normally costs, and that's just the insurable risk side of it.
Yeah,
you've got to sell kind of 250,000 bunches of bananas. You know, it's big amounts of sales to make profit.
Yeah, and it's that thing, you know, how did we get into this? Why did it become a priority for us? When you feel that pull from the end user, and then you start to break down the business case set behind it, it's eye-opening that along with the cost of the claim in the first place, you know, the cost of defending it, understanding it, going back to look at old video footage that you might or might not have, depending on how long you've retained it for, building the case to say why or why not it's actually a case. And that's the other side, Christian. You know, I've had many a night of fun, would you believe it? Sounds boring. On Google, looking at it, honestly, how people are out there to target these stores because they know it's an open door for them. And then you get into the illegitimate claims, which when you consider that and whether you're able to show there is a valid claim or not, there was a spill or not, there was an object, that's a whole other side to the story that often really doesn't get maybe cast into the spotlight, because it begins with the legitimate claims that are really focused on safety. But that's almost the dark side to it that often gets forgotten as well.
Yeah, I think people are better at dealing with those spurious claims than they were, but that doesn't mean that they're still not rife, you know.
They still exist. It's time, it's effort. That's exactly it. Yeah.
And exactly, there's a lot of cost in dealing with them, even if you don't pay the claim. And people get quite focused on the insurance claim costs because that's a number that they can calculate quite easily, and it's in a report and it's in black and white.
Yes. Yeah.
But they often neglect to think in as much detail as they should about all of these uninsured costs that aren't perhaps collated as carefully and, you know, creep up on you, and they're often a multiple of the insurance claim cost anyway. So, you know, arguably that's the bigger potential upside.
It is. And you asked me what the technology does, what the product is.
Yeah, so it'd be really just explain in very sort of layman's terms what it does, and then what that means for people. Yeah.
So very simply, we will take existing video cameras already installed, so there's no new infrastructure required. Take the video stream coming from them, and with artificial intelligence, machine learning, we will spot certain events in that video footage at the time they're occurring, such that we can send that through a notification system and alert. And when you think about what that means in practice, we are able to, within seconds of a spillage event, alert through whatever mechanism is chosen: email, text message, headset is popular in retail, such that someone can go along and take action on that spill event.
Yeah.
There's a really nice story begins to unfold from this, in that the root of it is in being able to identify something's happened at the point in time that it's happened. Over time, what we can then do is look at, for example, different stores and build KPIs around, well, how quickly did someone react to that in a particular store? I think a lot of the problem in addressing slips, trips, falls, spill events, is how do you get your arms around it to the extent that you know how well you did? What KPIs are you judging yourself on?
Yeah.
If you've made a change, what was the resulting outcome of that change?
Yeah.
Because we're able to trap it at the point it's happened, we can start to answer some of those questions and complete the loop, if you like.
Yeah.
And what we're finding from those that we're talking to is there's the real-time action that's important. So someone will go and address that spill, whether it's to clean it, whether it's to, you know, cordon off the area, whether it's to divert customers to another area.
Yeah.
There's options there. Business process, what do you choose to do about the spill?
Mm.
Once you've determined enough of those events and you've started to collate that information, you've effectively started to build a time series database of these events that becomes useful in retrospect.
Yeah.
Because you can now do the, you know, you roll it up a couple of layers to kind of area manager level or a certain geography, and you can now start to work out store-wide what's happening with those events.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating, in essence, an audit trail. And that might sound scary to begin with, but when you're in the world of liability, risk, improvement that you want to be able to judge on certain KPIs, you can see how catching the event at the point that it's occurred and recording and alerting becomes a trigger for all this to start being addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're then able to prove that you're being proactive as well, and prove that you've got robust systems, because a lot of the time, you know, insurance companies, for example, you know, are looking for, particularly at the moment, because of the way the insurance market is going, they're looking for risks of choice, for want of a better term. They're looking for the companies that they perceive as having a lower risk to insure, because they want a bit more certainty and fewer claims and so on. And part of that is telling a story from a customer perspective.
Yes.
You know, I talk a lot about with other people in the industry as well about, you know, you're not buying insurance, you're selling risk as a client. So, you know, actually that audit trail, that proof would be a fantastic way of selling risk, because if you look across sectors, in terms of insurance premiums, you know, it's something like a quarter, 20% to a quarter of your premium is slips, trips and falls costs. So, you know, if you can
huge, isn't it? Huge.
Yeah, you can be demonstrating to your insurer that you're doing stuff proactively that will have a big effect on that number, then that's going to be a positive thing. And the other side of it, of course, and we spoke about this before we started recording, is that means we can stop the accidents from happening in the first place in many cases.
And that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of, in that, you know, certainly to my kids when I speak to them about this, which I do, whether they like it or not, I talk to them about what goes on at work. and they see it as trivial. So someone slips. When you look at certain demographics, when you look at some of the incidents that have occurred, when you look at the outcome from some of these things, there's definitely the business side to it. There's definitely, questioning what hits the bottom line. But then in reality, there's if we stop the thing in the first place, the accident didn't need to happen. The individual that got hurt or worse, it didn't need to be in that position.
Yeah.
And then downstream flow a whole bunch of benefits that we've already spoken about, not least the financial one. But it's really interesting that if you think about the technology deployed for what it's deployed for today, we've got the solution in a number of trials. It was only released as a product offering 6 to 8 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah.
When you think about technology in its form today, you can then start to see how you can quickly build out from detecting a liquid and alerting on it to detecting the cleanup event, because the cleanup event is more often than not a liquid. So it's already halfway to solving that problem, combined with object detection. So because I've got the full view of the video frame at that point, it's relatively straightforward to work out what a cleaning sign is. I mean, those things have attributes to them that are relatively straightforward to see. And then when you piece that together as an audit trail, I've got event, time taken to action, cleaning event, geometry of where that cleaning event occurred, combined with the alert to the customers that the area had been cleaned. You've got quite a comprehensive audit trail there. Whether it's to be used or not, it's still useful to then send that data into other systems or reports to be able to build up a picture of what's happening around the store. You then know where your hotspots are, you know how long a certain store is taking versus another store to clean up. It's giving you not just the spill insight, but almost a business insight into what's happening, what is, without something like that, a black box, isn't it? I mean,
and I can think of another example to support this, which is working with an FM company who clean airports, and we did some work looking at 2 different airports. One of them was in and around London, and one of them was in the northwest.
Nice.
The one in London was a smaller area to clean and maintain, but had much higher footfall. But when we got into the nuts and bolts of the slips and trips, looking at the floor surfaces and doing the pendulum testing and all that stuff, there wasn't really any difference. The floors were just as slippery as one and the other. There was potentially something around demographics, but actually we found that the biggest thing was the amount of cleaning staff per square foot or whatever it was, because what that meant was in the London airports, they had many more cleaning staff, and therefore they were able to respond more quickly. This was our hypothesis, to the spillages and deal with them before the incident happened, and therefore they had fewer incidents, fewer claims. Whereas in the other airport, they had a big area with fewer full-time equivalent staff, and therefore these spillages were having a much more serious effect because they just simply weren't getting dealt with.
Absolutely, yeah. And then it's the probability game, isn't it? Can I identify? Can I act upon? More firepower means probably generally yes. If you can augment that with technology that's pointing you in the right direction, I think we might be onto something, Christian.
Exactly. So you mentioned you've got a few trials. Have you got any sort of data that you could share on that yet, or any kind of, without naming any names, obviously, but any kind of headline figures of how that's all going?
Yeah, and of course, we're under NDA yet. As the names come out, we'll be sure to share them. It's in everyone's interest to do that. We have started with major retailers for the discussion that we had earlier. It extends beyond that, though. You touched upon airports. Anywhere where there's a high density of people, you can see how we've got the vertical that we're addressing right now for all the reasons we've discussed. We're seeing from a business point of view, return on investment 3 months or under. The cases that we've built. In terms of the recognition, so in terms of being able to identify the spill events, one thing that was in question to begin with was, do I need to litter the full store with the algorithm to be able to see everything. And it really comes down to the 80-20 rule that you don't. You want to focus on the areas that you know are problematic first, largely areas with liquid. Fridges are another, this almost came by proxy, but being able to observe a spill event, which is a leaking fridge, is also important for various reasons. Not least because that spill occurs over time, and seeing that is actually sometimes quite difficult to identify. But what we're seeing in terms of incidents discovered, we're above 90% already. Now, it really comes down to what action you take upon that. But we've got a high confidence rating that the spill is there. In the cases we've observed it, and we're checking right now, doing a whole lot of checking as to whether or not the algorithm is correct. It's very accurate. The question then is how you address it, such that the business case you build is based off the back of that. I can tell you it's there. Whether you did the right thing with it and whether the desired outcome occurred is a business process thing. And really, that's a lot to do with what you've spoken about, a lot of what you've seen. I'm sure the investigation, the reports you do. It's around, are we best prepared for this? Can we do something with it? But at a top level, great accuracy that we're seeing, ROI 3 months or less. And then the question becomes one of where and how do we scale this? Because it's all right doing it at a single number of store level. Really what you want to do for maximum impact is take 80-20, focus it on the areas that you know are important in a given store, and scale that across a number of stores. And that's kind of the inflection point we're reaching now, where really and truly, to give the right stats and the feedback on it, you need to be at multiple hundreds of stores.
Of course,
That's the journey we're on.
And to get the payback as well, because one of the biggest challenges around slips and trips is that whilst it's the biggest cause of accident and injury and insurance claim year after year in the UK and the US and whatever, if you divide the number of people seriously hurt and the number of claims by the number of buildings, it's well under 1 per building. So if you're doing 5 or 6 stores, you might not actually truly get the return investment, or you won't be able to see it because those stores might not have had claims in the past. Whereas if you put it across the whole estate, you know that they will have had the claims just because they're thinly spread.
It's the averaging. That's exactly it. Yeah. But again, like we spoke about before, the scale of some of these claims in the numbers that we get to see, it is huge. It's like any business, isn't it? You can never track right down to the actual single dollar cost, but the cost of having to deal with and not having enough of a staged process to follow with evidence almost from the camera event. When we detect a spill, you can choose, it's a sliding window of time, but you can choose, do you want to record pre-spill, post-spill? So at the event occurring, you can also then attach a video clip with it.
Of what happened.
Of what happened, that's it. And then in dealing with that, whether it's defending a claim or otherwise, you've reduced the time in actually going back and looking at what happened, because you've got the marker in time when it happened, and then you've got the associated collateral. So even just in time saved researching what happened, which is it's a person cost. Somebody has to do that. There's almost the additional invisible benefit as well there, I guess.
Yeah, and actually the speed of being able to make a decision is really important as well. So there is a spill, you detect it, but it doesn't get dealt with very quickly, and someone has an accident. Well, actually, knowing that and having all those timings is very useful, because then the customer is in a position to actually make a quick decision and say, well, actually, we messed up here. Let's just settle it. Let's settle this claim quickly and as cost effectively as we can, rather than, right now they'd be thinking, well, we did this or we did that, and we're not sure about this and we're not sure about that.
And what foundation you stood on? Yeah.
So it all adds to the time, and that all adds to the cost as well. Great. So where can people find out more? And is there anything else that you wanted to share that I haven't asked you before we start wrapping up?
Very good question. Yeah. So we need to have people go to the Ocucon website, Ocucon, or the SeeChange website, seechange.ai. They will link you back to the appropriate pages, contact us form on there. Even if it's just a follow up to get more information. We've got a plethora of data and information here that we can share and use to highlight why we're in this space in the first place. And then in answering the second question, what I would say is around the product, the offering, it's been great to get this airtime with you. I think the campaign that you're on, Christian, I know this is decade long for you. You've been focused on this, but it's a great job. It's an area that definitely is coming into the spotlight more so. Perhaps it's somewhat in part to the work that you've been doing, but there are these other variables, as I've said, that have influenced it. I think the corporate social responsibility, being there at the board level agenda. Yeah. I think now it's a case of, there are more wanting to do more about this, hence the reason we've entered into it. And if we can, join forces to make that happen, keep the campaign going, all the better. Yeah. The other thing I would say is I've done this podcast from my shed.
Oh, nice.
Or summer house, depending on where you are in the country.
It's a shed in Manchester. It'd be a summer house in London.
Well, that's it. It's the shed, yeah. And you might have heard some of the birds in the background. The part of the COVID period was spent insulating the shed. I did it top to bottom, insulated it, Christian, put some soft floor tile in. Fantastic. It's got windows on 3 sides. So the sun shines through the summer. It gets far too hot. It's actually a greenhouse in summer. Through the winter, the floor isn't insulated, so it gets far too cold.
Far too cold.
Acoustics aren't great. Birds out, at springtime, kind of just go with it. But 8:30 UK time started the discussion in the shed, and hopefully, hopefully it's gone all right, as I say, with the acoustics.
It was fine. Don't worry. I often get interrupted by my 6.5-year-old when I'm doing these evening podcasts. But I had a stern word with him before we started today, and he seems to have done a good job. So the other week he saw a dragon, I think, that he said, and so I came and interrupted halfway through, which I had to then edit out or get someone to edit out for this more accurately. But no, it was all good, Mark. So thank you very much for that. I'll add all the links and stuff,
Brilliant.
and your LinkedIn as well to the show notes. Hope everybody listening in has found that useful. I think it's great. I'm really excited by it. Anything that shines more of a light on this problem is great as far as I'm concerned. So, was really keen to get you on. So hope everybody enjoyed it. If you did, please hit subscribe. Please give us a review, because that helps other people to get to know about the podcast through the wacky algorithms, which you'll probably know much more about than me. But look forward to seeing everybody in the coming weeks with some more good guests. And thanks again, Mark.
Pleasure to have spoken, Christian. Thank you. And thanks all for listening in.